had nothing to do with any of this.
Hey everyone, this is Goober, and welcome to another deep dive into Red Faction. In this video, I'm going to give you an in-depth look into the 7 characters central to the first Martian Revolution and the events of the first Red Faction game. These are characters who, thanks to their ingenious dialogue,
it has made my work so much easier.
What's that mean, you half-human freak?
have had a huge impact on the Red Faction series as a whole. Just a quick note before we get started, this video is going to contain a lot of spoilers. The game's almost 20 years old, so I'm not really going to concern myself with that, but if you don't want the entire story to get spoiled for you, maybe watch my long play video first, which I'll link up in the top right, or play through the game yourself. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started, and first up is our player character, Parker. So who is this guy that we play as in Red Faction? Who is the hero of the story? Who is Parker? Well, he's not particularly interesting. He's a guy in his mid-20s from Illinois, just outside of Chicago, who decides to rebel against his parents, who had his whole life planned out for him with a Harvard education and a career in academia, to instead sign up for the ultra mining operations on Mars. Once he signs up, he's herded along with all the other recruits into a shuttle destined for Mars, and once he gets there, I'll let him describe the conditions.
Life in the mines is hell.
Well, he definitely doesn't sugarcoat it. What makes you say that, Parker?
You're jammed 8 to a room, time-sharing your bunks. Conditions are barely livable, and the guards are everywhere.
So, you kind of get the idea that things are not exactly Oh, wait, he wasn't done.
As bad as things are in the barracks, they're brutal down in the mines. You spend 10 hours drenched in your own sweat in the enviro suit, grinding away at rock walls. The guards make sure you work the whole shift.
So as you can see... Alright, he's still not done.
And then there's the plague killing off miners left and right. When the guy next to you dies before your eyes and your turn could come any minute, it freaks you out.
So as you can see, Mars sounds like the ideal vacation spot for you and your entire family. I don't even know what this whole revolt thing is about.
Eltor's responsible for the plague.
Oh, right, that. Well, moving on. Throughout the course of Red Faction, Parker battles his way through the mines, the barracks, the docking bay, more mines, the power plant, the offices, the caves, the hospital, more caves, Capek's lab, the canyon, the comm center, the tramway, the space station, even more caves, and finally the Merc base. But hang on, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. First we need to go back and look at why Parker is the way he is. To properly understand the character of Parker, I need to take you back to 1998 and the release of Valve Software's original Half-Life, which was pretty obviously a major influence on Red Faction. Half-Life puts the player in the role of Gordon Freeman, a silent protagonist who is a theoretical physicist at the Black Mesa compound who causes a resonance cascade event opening a portal to another dimension. Similar to how in Red Faction, Parker is just thrust into the revolution, Gordon is then thrust into a situation where he's left with no other option but to fight through waves and waves of aliens and marines in order to escape the facility. Because the player character is silent in Half-Life, there are very few cutscenes. The vast majority of the game's story is told through interactive sequences, and you never hear a word from Gordon Freeman at all. Now, as I mentioned before, it's pretty obvious that Half-Life was a major influence on Red Faction. You can even see some parallels in some of the sequences in the first Red Faction game, but one thing that they didn't take from Half-Life and use in Red Faction is the silent protagonist. For Red Faction, Volition opted for Parker to have an active role in telling the game's story through dialogue in cutscenes.
Shut up, Weasel. If Eos didn't want you, you'd be dead by now. I'll decide when it's time to go. Okay, let's go.
In Red Faction, we hear directly from Parker. We hear from him quite a lot, in fact, and that's not always a good thing, because it's very rare for his dialogue to actually advance the story any.
This one's for you, Mom.
Sometimes he's just threatening to completely derail the mission, and other times he's just being stupid.
You're Gryphon, right?
Deputy Administrator Gryphon? Yes.
Why do I need your help?
Gryphon knows all about the plague. I need you to go into admin and kidnap Gryphon.
I have vital information. You must take me to Eos.
Remember, Parker, we want Gryphon alive.
Try to run, and you'll be the first to die.
The end of the Red Faction story sees Eos bestow the title of Hero on Parker for calling in the Earth Defense Force to clean up the rest of the mercs. She suggests that he look for a new job, maybe start dating, but it's kind of left up to your own interpretation what happened to Parker after the end of the campaign.
That's the rescue force you called in, Parker. They'll clean up whatever mercs are left.
Well, fast forward 8 years, and finally we have our answer as to what happened with Parker.
Crazy Parker, they called me. Crazy Parker. I ain't so crazy.
He never left Mars at all. In fact, in Red Faction Guerrilla, Parker, now an old man, lives in a tiny shack on the side of a big sinkhole and rambles to anybody that comes by about his adventures with the Red Faction.
Ultor was so bad they made the EDF look like good guys. The EDF are assholes now. And they were assholes then, but I'll take them over Ultor any old day.
In addition, the very first area that you go to in Red Faction Guerrilla is named Parker, after the hero of the first Martian Revolution. Then again, I'm not so sure the modern-day version of Parker really cares about this. He's got a lot more important things going on these days.
It's party time! Time for a party! Today's my birthday! Happy birthday to me! Where's my present, you son of a bitch?
I have absolutely no idea who voiced old Parker in Red Faction Guerrilla, and I can't seem to find the answer to that question anywhere, so if you know who it was, feel free to post a comment down below. In the first Red Faction game, however, Parker was voiced by Dale Ingram, an actor and producer who also played this guy in The Adventures of Megabyte Man.
Really?
No, not really.
Oh, you had me going there.
Okay, Zip, from the top.
You're logged on to virtual memory.
Maybe that's where Parker would have been if he didn't go to Mars.
You can't kill me! I'm invincible!
Next up, we have Orion, who is another miner and a lieutenant in the Red Faction. Orion and Eos grew up with each other, so when Eos decided that Mars needed to be rid of Ultor, Orion was the first person she turned to help. Over the next little while, Orion and Eos together worked to recruit and train a small number of miners to be ready for the upcoming fight against Ultor.
Okay, Parker, this is the training phase of your Red Faction probationary period. If you survive, you'll be ready to help lead the miner rebellion against Ultor when the time comes.
It was also originally Orion's idea to start the Red Faction as a team in an athletic competition between miners. In fact, even the name Red Faction itself was Orion's creation.
You gotta shout Red Faction like you mean it! Red Faction!
And as if that wasn't already enough, Orion was also the one who rigged and detonated a bomb that killed 6 guards and officially kicked off the Red Faction revolt. Now, with an awesome backstory like that, having come up with the name, kicked off the revolt, trained all the recruits, worked on all the planning and the preparation with Eos, Orion just has to have a really important and central role in the game, right? Well, you'd think so, but no. You interact with Orion a grand total of 3 times in the campaign. The first time you meet him, he steals all your weapons and gives you a suit.
Got a monkey suit for you, Parker. Put it on and keep it on. Give me your weapons. They're too bulky to carry beneath the suit.
Next, he takes your hostage and leaves you to crawl through vent shafts after climbing down into a big flaming pit.
We're here to take Gryphon to Eos.
And then finally, he sits uselessly in a jeep and refuses to help you fight Capek before driving you very slowly to the end of a long canyon where you're getting shot at from all directions, and then hands you a floppy disk, but he doesn't know what's on it. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say Orion's called it quits on the heavy lifting. He makes up for it if you throw a remote charge on him, though. Anyway, later in the game, Hendrix says that he lost contact with Orion and his squad while they were on their way to meet up with us in the Merc base, but honestly, I think it's a bit of a miracle that Orion even made it out of the canyon. There were only 2 exits. I blew up the comm center at one side, and Capek blew up his own lab at the other side. Also, we really have no idea what happened to Orion after the events of the first Red Faction game. Maybe the reason why Hendrix lost touch with him was because he was captured or killed. We don't know. Even in Red Faction Guerrilla, there are sectors named after Parker and Eos and a building named after Hendrix, but despite all of his contributions to the Red Faction revolt, the EDF doesn't even seem to know Orion existed. Orion's voice comes from Joel Corey, an actor whose voice you may have also heard in ads for McDonald's, Kellogg's, Home Depot, and the California Milk Advisory Board.
This homely dirt dweller just transformed from a spud into a stud.
In addition to voicing commercials, Joel also played a Moyle having a heart attack in this episode of the 90s TV show Early Edition.
You know, actually, I don't feel so good.
I know, sit down.
No, I'll be all
Somebody
right.
call a paramedic. Good guy. There's one outside.
So soon, how can that be?
He was in the neighborhood.
Oh, no, I'm gonna be all right.
I hadn't even heard of Early Edition before I looked it up for this video, but it's actually a pretty good show. Next on our list is the leader of the Red Faction Revolt, Eos. For a character that plays such a central role in the first Red Faction game, there's not actually a lot that we know about Eos from before the Red Faction Revolution started.
You just don't understand yet.
All we really do know is that both of her parents were Ultor workers, and her mother was one of the earliest plague victims.
Eos had that thing on her face. Every time I looked at her, I thought, what the hell does she got under there?
Okay, so we also know that Eos always wears a visor over half of her face, but we don't really know why, what's under it, or why it looks exactly like the side of a merc's face, and the game never tells us, so we're just gonna have to come to our own conclusions.
Maybe it was wires. Or warts.
Yeah, sure, that'll work.
Someone named Eos is putting up pamphlets in the barracks, claiming that Ultor is responsible for the plague.
Oh yeah, this seems like a good place to mention that we don't actually know what Eos's name is. The name Eos is definitely a code name. If it wasn't, she would have been killed a long time before the revolution even got off the ground. Following her mother's death, Eos spent the next 4 years working very closely with her childhood friend Orion to steal and stockpile weapons, to plan attacks, to recruit additional Red Faction members, and to arrange accidents for any other miners they thought were Ultor spies.
If I live through this, I'm going back to Earth.
Throughout the first probably 50% of the game, the player's main interaction with Eos is over the radio, where she's constantly yelling at you to go and do stuff.
Remember, Parker, we need your help. Put on the suit he gives you. You have to grab Capek.
Parker, stop!
Parker, clean out this area. Parker, send the launch signal. Parker.
After that, she helps you kill Capek, she stays behind while his lab is self-destructing, then she develops the plague herself, gets captured by the mercs, and the player has to save her at the end of the game.
Parker, don't just stand there. Masako set the timer on the bomb before she went up after you.
Hey, the antidote works.
Yeah, it seems to. Mind getting out of my face?
Eos apparently left Mars before the events of Red Faction Guerrilla. However, the EDF did name a sector on Mars in her honor. It's where most of the wealthy colonists are, as well as the Martian government. Eos is voiced by Susan Messing. I'm pretty sure this is the only video game that she's done, but she's been in a number of other TV shows and movies.
$15 for a lap dance.
In addition to being an actress and voice actor, Susan's also a comedian and apparently very experienced at improvisation.
I did something on Comedy Central where I had a punching puppet and it punched me all the time and I'm crumbling as the character and the puppet's getting all the fucking laughs and blow me. It was horrible.
In case you're wondering, I did try, but I couldn't find the video she's talking about.
Get off my property, Flatlander.
Moving along, next up is Hendrix. Hendrix is a security technician with Ultor who has his own reasons for hating them and wanting to help you.
I'm a security technician with Ultor. I have my own reasons for hating them and wanting to help you.
The game doesn't actually tell us what any of these reasons are, though, just that they exist. This seems like a bit of a cop-out to me if I'm completely honest, but if we go to some of the promo material that Volition released prior to the game's release, we get some of these answers. The gist is basically that Hendrix was born on Mars, his parents really admired Ultor, although they did everything they could to keep Hendrix out of the mines, and he began computer hacking at a young age, and he's been kinda rooting around in Ultor's systems ever since.
I can hack into the mainframes as they're rebooted.
Ultor also killed both of Hendrix's parents, his childhood best friend, and his friend's entire family, so yeah, I guess he had some good reasons.
Don't you realize when you hit reply all, you send to the whole damn team? Please stop!
Throughout the first part of the game, although you do get to see him in person once, Hendrix mainly interacts with the player via a series of radio messages where he keeps you updated on what's happening in other areas of the mining complex that he can see on his security cameras. He also occasionally acts as a bit of a go-between between the player and Eos.
Hendrix says you made it into the geothermal plant.
In the later part of the campaign, Hendrix joins the player in person as you both infiltrate the Merc base to confront the Merc leader Masako.
Let's go.
Hendrix's role in this mainly consists of opening a couple of doors for the player before Masako makes it very clear to him what Mercs do to traitors.
Here's what mercs do to traitors, Hendrix.
Hendrix is seen as a bit of a martyr because he was killed fighting for the Red Faction before he got to see the revolution succeed. We find out in Red Faction Guerrilla that as a result of this, when the Earth Defense Force takes control of Mars after the events of the first Red Faction game, they named the seat of the Martian Council and the Martian government Hendrix Hall in his honor. Hendrix's voice comes from Loretto Shepard, a voice actor who, well, I was going to show you a clip of him, but I'm pretty sure Red Faction is the only thing he's ever done. If you happen to know of anything else he did, leave a comment down below, I'd like to check it out. In lieu of a video clip, I'll just play an outtake for you from when he was voicing Hendrix for Red Faction 1.
Alright. Just come in here and punch me, I mean, that's the best thing. Real pain.
Moving along, next up we have Gryphon. Roughly 1 year prior to the events of the first Red Faction game, Richard Gryphon arrived on Mars to take the position of Deputy Administrator to Administrator Davis. Davis had recently been appointed to that role after the former Administrator disappeared under mysterious circumstances.
This won't hurt a bit.
More on that later. Anyway, Gryphon gave up a successful business career on Earth to go to Mars and be Ultor's number 2 on the planet, thinking that it would be a prestigious and cushy job. Once he started looking through Ultor's personnel files, he discovered that lots of scientists and miners went to the planet, but none ever left. When Gryphon brought this up with Administrator Davis, Davis told him to drop it, which didn't sit well with him, so he confronted Capek on it. After Capek scared the hell out of him, Gryphon decided to help the Red Faction. In the game, Parker kidnaps Gryphon on Eos's direction and delivers him to Orion.
Parker, Gryphon, over here.
Orion then interrogates Gryphon and learns all about Capek's involvement with the Plague, as well as where Capek's lab is located deep in the Martian underground. We never really find out what happened to Gryphon after the revolution. He did say, though, that he wanted to go back to Earth, so if he survived, that's probably what he did. Oh yeah, Gryphon also refers to himself as the G-Man. Did I mention this game came out right after Half-Life?
Stay here. I'll wave us in.
Gryphon is voiced by B.J. Jones, an actor and director who, since Red Faction came out, has focused more on stage performances than TV shows, movies, or video games, but he did play a hostage negotiator in this episode of Early Edition.
Hello. This is George Kermit's negotiator, Chicago Police Department. I'd like to... What?
He wants to talk to you.
Me?
Keep him calm.
Next up, we have Colonel Masako, leader of the Ruthless Mercenary Corps and the final boss Parker fights in the Red Faction 1 campaign. Masako and her mercenary squad are brought in the later part of the game to clean up the mess, which apparently involves invading the mining complex, killing everyone they find, arming a nuclear weapon, and then trying to get off the planet before it detonates. At some point toward the later part of the game, Masako kidnaps Eos and straps her down next to an active nuke about to explode, and then proceeds to issue corny B-movie style threats against Parker and his parents immediately prior to confronting him.
Maybe I'll pay a visit to your parents when I get back to Earth. There won't even be a body for them to sob over. You and the rest of the scum will be vaporized in the blast.
Oh, also in her spare time, I think Masako is involved with the production and or distribution of rugged computer consoles that are immune to explosions. Overall, though, we don't actually know that much about Masako from the game. Most of what we do know about her comes from promo materials and strategy guides, and from those we can learn she's not a big fan of, well, anyone. Just check out some of these quotes. She goes from calling Capek a pompous ass and a half-cyborg bastard to an arrogant son of a bitch and implant boy. Next, she says that she'd like to leave boot prints on Gryphon's face before referring to Gryphon and Administrator Davis as jellyfish, then insulting all of Ultor's employees by calling them eggheads or admin puffballs and talking about how she doesn't give a shit if any of them live or die.
Let me tell you something. That whole damn EDF couldn't beat Colonel Masako. That old bitch fought a man alive. And she ate him.
It just keeps getting better. We also learned from the promo material that after this mission is over, Masako is planning on going back to Earth, specifically London, to get some sort of unannounced payback on this ambiguous group of old street scum that we know absolutely nothing about. Additionally, apparently Masako's been doing these types of jobs for Ultor for over 15 years now, just going in whenever there's a protest or a rebellion against the company and slaughtering everyone in sight. I really hope Ultor's giving hazard pay to all their employees by now. In the Saints Row series, which is set in the same universe 60 to 70 years before, Ultor is a clothing company that's trying to diversify into other industries.
Welcome to hell.
So, I guess when Parker said the Ultor recruitment office was like if Hell opened a tourism office downtown, that's literally what it was. Oh yeah, even though Saints Row takes place over 50 years before Red Faction, the Ultor security service team in Saints Row is called the Masako team. I can't explain that one, and I'm not convinced Volition can either. Now, some people who have played Red Faction remember Masako as this warrior who flies around in Capek's nanotech shield, shooting you with her precision rifle before falling to Parker and setting the stage for Parker to become a hero. But not me. When I think back to the first time I played Red Faction, I can remember saying, wow, either Volition didn't know how to finish this story, so just threw her in at the end, or I think Masako is part of a story arc that never fully got fleshed out. I have a theory on this, which I was going to put into this video, but it was quickly becoming enough content to become a whole video on its own, so look out for that in the future. Masako is voiced by Alyssa Fraden, an actress and former president of the Screen Actors Guild Chicago branch. Here's Alyssa playing a news anchor in a short film named October Surprise.
We're going to show you some amazing image manipulation, which should serve as a reminder to us all that in the digital age, you can't believe anything you see.
And finally, we have Dr. Axel Capek, an Ultor scientist who, despite his death in the first game, would go on to have an impact on every other game in the Red Faction series.
Ultor's behind the plague, and it's all Capek's fault. He's the head of Ultor's science and medical labs on Mars. They've been running some experiments.
Well, that's a pretty accurate description, though running some experiments might be putting it a little mild.
Now, Capek was doing some strange science. Nanotechnology. He made a suit that could stop a bullet. That's right, I said soup. S-O-U-P. That's the honest truth.
Yeah. Anyway, for 5 years prior to the events of the first Red Faction campaign, Capek had been experimenting using nanotechnology deep below the surface of Mars. In his own words, he was exploring the infinite potential of nanotechnology when applied to organic systems. This basically meant giving Ultor employees nanotech injections when they went for their routine physicals and then seeing what happens.
Get out of here, you fool! Don't you see what happens to miners Capek gets his hands on?
Following these physicals, miners and other Ultor employees would start developing violent tendencies, aggressive tendencies, mutations, and then eventually die. Miners would grow to refer to this as the Plague, which then provided Ultor with a great opportunity to offer to vaccinate them against the Plague, and I'm sure you can guess how that went. There's also some indication that Capek may have had somewhat of a hand in encouraging the miner revolution.
These troubles have given me the perfect excuse to accelerate my experiments. Who will notice a few more vanished miners in all this confusion?
They set this whole thing up.
Now, obviously, this one voice line is not hard evidence of anything. However, Gryphon would have had access to a lot of internal Ultor communication that we probably never saw, and the game never really explains what he means by they set this whole thing up. Given that, I guess it's technically possible that Capek had something to do with the revolution getting off the ground, though I'm still thinking that's pretty unlikely. Visually, we can see that Capek has a number of what appear to be cybernetic implants, though the game is never really clear on exactly what function they serve.
Run, now, or you'll end up like those things!
Anyway, in the campaign, after Eos is done interrogating Gryphon, she sends you to go kidnap Capek so that she can question him about the plague and its origins.
You have to grab Capek. He's the key to the whole thing.
The player then confronts Capek in his hospital, where we see his nanotech shield for the first time and get treated to some amazing animations.
Congratulations, Parker. You were the first to see my nanotech shield in action.
Look how deep in thought he looks, and then watch this. You know, that screaming scientist may have a point. Anyway, next the player chases Capek through 2 whole chapters of caves, including Capek Zoo, where you see some of the animals that he's been experimenting on.
Do you recognize any old friends? Not every specimen reacts favorably to nanotech injections.
Anyway, after the caves, Parker and Eos battle Capek in his underground lab in what is basically the first major boss fight of the game.
Give us the antidote for the plague and we'll let you live.
Later in the game, we find out that those efforts were a success. Hendrix was able to salvage the antidote from Capek's computer files.
Hey, the antidote works.
Yeah, it seems to. Mind getting out of my face? We've got medics delivering it to sick miners all over the complex. The plague will be history by tomorrow.
Now, you'd think that his impact on the story would be mostly done after he dies, but the entire Red Faction 2 storyline focuses on Capek's research, which was stolen from Mars and brought to Earth and used to create nano-enhanced super soldiers.
Nanotechnology, created by an Ultor scientist on Mars. Stolen, brought to Earth, stolen and stolen again.
The fact that Red Faction 2 refers to Capek just as an Ultor scientist rather than using his name kind of makes me think that they were planning on dropping his influence on the series after that, but that was 2002. Fast forward to 2009, and an additional 50 years in universe time, and Capek is back again influencing the story in a much more explicit way than he did in Red Faction 2.
Setting up a new base of operations in the Badlands.
In Red Faction Guerrilla's Ultor Echo mission, the player character Alec Mason follows a group of marauders who are supposedly descendants of Ultor scientists from the first game into the ruins of Capek's lab where Parker and Eos killed him.
Given the location, you might be in the old Ultor mining complex. It was abandoned decades ago after the first Red Faction uprising.
Throughout this mission, Alec hears Capek's haunting voice reciting several voice lines that we remember from the first game. And we also find the Nanoforge, which was a device Capek apparently developed that we never heard about until Guerrilla, but will become an integral part of the story moving forward.
I've got some kind of device here. I've never seen anything like it.
I won't give away the ending to Red Faction Guerrilla, but suffice to say that the Nanoforge plays a pretty big part in it. Moving forward to the fourth game in the series, in Red Faction Armageddon, Darius Mason, Alec Mason's grandson, upgrades the Nanoforge so that he can use it as a combat weapon. Additionally, the primary story arc in Red Faction Armageddon revolves around an ancient Martian race that was originally analyzed and documented by Capek and his researchers. On Capek's orders, this ancient race of Martians was sealed deep underground prior to the events of the first Red Faction game. While destroying an old Marauder temple that included a hologram of Capek, Darius Mason unknowingly broke the seal and allowed the creatures to escape.
Is that who I think it is? Capek, former Alter scientist. Died during Parker's rebellion, Yeah, I got it. Creepy looking bastard.
This may have changed by the time that you're listening to this, but as of the time that I'm recording this, there's been no official confirmation nor announcement of a future Red Faction game in development past Red Faction Armageddon. Who knows, maybe you're listening to my voice and you already know the answer to whether those Red Faction Evolution rumors were true. I certainly don't. I think it's a safe assumption, though, that any future game in the series is going to have some major influence from Capek and his research into nanotechnology. Capek is voiced by Brad Armacost, an actor who's been around since the 80s and has done everything from stage to film to video games. More recently, he starred in VC, a comedy web series on YouTube.
With this new app, you just upload the photo, scale to fit, and you can virtually place yourself in up to 50 casket options.
This is another series that I had absolutely no idea existed before I started recording this video, but I've gone back since and watched some of the other clips from it, and I actually kind of like it. So hey, why not go check it out? You might end up liking it too, especially if you imagine his character in this as being Capek. I'll put a link to it down in the description.
My work, all gone.
And there we go. There's all 7 characters central to the Red Faction storyline and the events of the first Red Faction game. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel to get updates when I put out new videos. And if you're at all interested in the Red Faction series or any of the games within it, I'd like to invite you to join the Red Faction community on Discord. We have an active Discord community going for the series, despite the fact that the first game came out almost 20 years ago, and we'd love to have you as well. So I'll put a link in the description to join that Discord server.
I miss them all. Yes, I do. Eos, Hendrix, Orion, hell, even Gryphon. They're all gone now. I'm all that's left. Me. And my memories.
See you next time, everyone.